All right, so we have now planed a face. We've made the other face parallel. We have an edge that is square to the first face. Now it's time for us to start working on the ends of the board. So I'm going to work on planing the end grain here. Got this clamped up and ready to go. I'm going to want to have a square somewhere close by so I can check it for squareness. I'm going to kind of check before I get started so I know where to put some of my effort. At a quick glance here, I can tell that this end is going to be my high end. I'll mention too that I do have my reference edge facing me so that I can remember where that's at. This other edge will get planed away, so if I do end up with some tear out there, I can remove it and not damage the board, not lose out, not cry too much over it. So I'm going to start planing across this. Now end grain can be tricky to plane. It's more resistant than everything else on the board that you're going to plane. So having a good sharp blade will help to do that. You can do it with just a regular bench plane. It'll work fine. You can buy a lower angle plane to do that. I don't have one for that, and it works out just fine. One thing that I will mention though, when planing across the end grain, this little bit here, this is prone to tear out at the end of the cut. You're catching those fibers. There's nothing to hold them in place to keep them from wanting to just chip and break away. So one of the tricks that I've learned to help prevent that a little bit, again, this is all waste material here. If I've got a little bit of material that I'm going to remove, then I'm going to sacrifice some of this wood, and I'm actually going to plane just the tiniest little chamfer on here, just a little bit of an angle. I'm just going to come onto one side. I'm just going to carefully take away some of that. Doesn't have to be pretty. No one's going to see this at the end of the day. It's all going to be removed eventually. But I'm just creating this little chamfer, this little angle, this little bevel. And what that's going to do is that's going to help prevent some of the tear out. So now these end fibers, I'm not going to be hitting those and grabbing those and pulling them out quite as much. So that's going to help me out a little bit in this process of flattening this whole board to at least avoid some of the worst of the potential disasters that could happen. So I'm going to come back. Sorry, another note with that. Don't do that if this is already close to size. You might not have material to waste on that. Do it as long as this is oversized and you've got material to plane that away and make it go away. So now let's plane this down, make this surface square to my edge and square to my reference face. So I'm just going to take some cuts across there. Make sure we're good and tight. Right. You'll notice that initially I'm just going to be cutting some wood on this end. I'll slowly make those cuts longer until I get it all the way across, and I will check how we're doing for squareness. So I've cleaned up some of that, gotten some of the saw marks off of that surface. It feels good and smooth. Let's see how it's looking. So I've got some daylight coming through at this end, no daylight at the other end. So I still need to remove some down here, pretty heavily too, actually. Now another trick that can help you when cutting end grain is actually, all right, still a little daylight there, is actually to take and skew your blade a little bit. So if I go straight on, my blade is hitting the end grain at 45 degrees, at a 45 degree angle like this. If I skew it like this, I've lowered that angle. It actually makes it cut through the fiber a little bit easier. So I don't want to skew too far because now this just wants to rock and roll and it's hard to keep it on the board. But I'm going to skew it just a little. And that's going to help me remove some of the resistance to cutting that end grain. Make it a little easier to clean that up. Oh, that's looking pretty good. I don't see any daylight now coming through, which tells me that this surface is now square to this surface, but I don't know if it's square to these surfaces, to the faces. So I'm just going to check it, looking for that daylight again. That actually worked out very nicely. I don't see daylight coming through that at all along here. So I know now that I'm good and square, and I'll just make another quick note to myself. In this case, I'll sometimes make a box that will look kind of like that on that corner. That tells me that all of these surfaces are square to each other. That corner is a nice square corner. If when I'm doing this end grain, if I've got this square to the edge, but this I'm having trouble squaring it to the face, I'm going to use the same trick that I used on the edge. So if it's high on one edge, if it's high on this side, I'll just move the plane over to that side and plane a little bit, and then gradually move the plane back until it's all flat, or vice versa. So the same planing techniques as you use on the edge that you do on the end grain. But I've got everything square, so I want to leave that alone. Don't touch that again. And I'll do the same thing then at the other end. So I would cut this to length, cut it off, and then proceed to square off and smooth that side too, so that everything's good and even.
If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking, come take a class at our school in Earlysville, Virginia. You can also visit our website at woodandshop.com, where you'll find a bunch of free woodworking lessons, workshop tours, and our very popular tool buying guides. And make sure you subscribe to our free newsletter to get our latest articles and videos. Enjoy!